This is the Psychedelic Medicine podcast.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Psychedelic Medicine podcast. I'm Dr. Lynn Marie Morsky, your guide on this journey, and today we're going to be discussing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for accelerated growth with Dr. Nick Brüss. Nick is a leading psychedelic therapist licensed in California, New York, and Texas. He was a MAPS clinician and supervisor on the historic Phase 3 MDMA for PTSD study, and he's the director of psychedelic medicine advocacy for the Treat California Ballot Initiative. Now, before we get to Dr. Brüss, just a reminder that the Psychedelic Medicine podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing here is to be construed as medical or legal advice. And one more thing. If you happen to be a clinician like Dr. Brüss and you'd like to learn more about psychedelics, please visit the Psychedelic Medicine Association's website to learn more about what we're doing to educate clinicians all around the world on psychedelics so that you can feel comfortable discussing them with your patients and referring them when appropriate. You can find us at the Psychedelic Medicine Association website, which is psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. Now, without further ado, thanks for joining us today, Nick.
Lynn Marie, so excited to be here. I appreciate you, all the work that you do in your podcast. I've learned a lot, and it's a joy to be here.
Well, it's a joy to finally have you on. We connected, I don't know, maybe about 6 months ago, and we've been chatting back and forth. But one of my favorite things that I found out about Nick is that he and I are both from the same quasi-obscure portion of Southern Illinois, which is for two Californians a rare thing to be. So already a kindred spirit once we met. But I had been seeing your work on Instagram and other places for a while. It just sounds comically so like try to be like, I saw your work on Instagram, but seriously, that's so, I should be like LinkedIn, but no, I saw you on Instagram and I saw that you're doing a lot of great work and a lot of great training. And so I'm really excited to hear about, some of the things you have found through your work with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. And we'd gone back and forth on what topic to do, and you chose ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for accelerated growth. So I'd love to just start by asking, um, what led you to want to discuss that? Is it a pattern that you've seen in your patients? Or do you happen to have patients that come to you for that? Or is it just seemingly that that's been kind of a byproduct of things?
Yeah, thanks. The reason this topic is because it matches what I'm seeing. So I had been a therapist for nearly 10 years before the use, partnering with psychedelics in session. And having been trained in internal family systems in 2013, I was already seeing a lot of growth and progress in working with clients, a lot of great results. And then when adding, in this case, ketamine to the work, accelerated is just the natural fit of how to describe what's been happening.
And before we get any further into it, you brought up something that a lot of people in the psychedelic and therapy realms bring up, and I'm not sure that the average listener knows this. So can you explain what internal family systems is?
Sure. So briefly, internal family systems is a model created 35, 40 years ago by Richard Schwartz. And it is a very intuitive, non-pathologizing model that people can learn about themselves. This model holds, which is a little bit different than most other models, that there is an innate inner healing capacity, and we have access to that. And the problems that we face in our life and in our relationships have to do with aspects of us, parts of us that are likely carrying burdens or challenges. And this model, internal family systems, is a way of, I actually think of it as a training to get to know oneself, kind of map out the system. Oftentimes, there's these parts that are kind of polarized or in a tug of war. Whereas, as we get to know them, even externalize them in a way, then we're able to access this self that we really want. Call it your true self, core self, that can lead. It has been all the rage of late. meaning both the therapy in of itself and then where it is so synergistic with psychedelic assisted work, because it holds as part of one of its assumptions is that we all naturally have this multiplicity of minds. So we kind of have these sub personalities, or part of me wants this, part of me wants that. And we also hold this capacity, this inner knowing that we can open to and relate and even bring a loving, compassionate embrace to all of our parts. One example, inner critic. Most everyone, nearly everyone, is connected or aware of or can hear their inner critic. And that's one example of a way that we can actually get to know that part of someone, see what from its worldview of kind of what job it's doing, how it's protecting us. And then when that part of us feels seen and heard, then it doesn't have to work so hard to get our attention or scare us or throw up, red flags or set off all the alarms. And it leads towards a more harmonious, creative, fulfilled life.
That makes sense. And I appreciate you giving us that explanation, because prior to even, us starting this recording today, last week I had two separate people ask if I would do an episode on ketamine and internal family systems. Two.
Ah, well,
So
this is
it just
kind of it. Or
naturally happened. Yeah, it happens to be part of this episode. We are making, and I literally said to them, "Well, I'm not sure that the average listener knows what internal family systems is." So I love that we're going to educate on what that is and how it can work with ketamine assisted psychotherapy. Now, this is something that I'd like to kind of clarify to, even after all the episodes I've done and the years I spent in psychedelics, I still think that people have kind of different ideas of exactly what ketamine assisted psychotherapy looks like, as in, like, are the patients generally taking what we call more of a psycholytic dose, which you can explain,
Mhm,
versus taking a psychedelic dose? Because I think a lot of people would assume, well, if they're in a full-on psychedelic experience, how are you doing any psychotherapy
mhm,
with them? So can you give us just a little overview of what that whole, what it looks like? When are you actually speaking with the patient? What kind of,
mhm.
level of dose and level of, maybe dissociation or, psychedelic experience they're having?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple different models or approaches to ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And I want to highlight the part of that name, psychotherapy, because there's a lot of different treatments and even therapy out there that anyone can call anything therapy. Here's my glass of water. Ooh, water therapy. Hope that works well. But rather, psychotherapy. This means that there is a licensed, trained, essentially vetted through a process. They've had supervision. They've worked with a number of clients. They've had other people's eyes on them and have signed off like this person knows something, they're well intentioned, they're doing something right. That's not obviously a protection against all transgressions, but there is a vetting process there that someone has learned kind of the Western history, the Western model of psychotherapy. And within that, when we combine ketamine to that process, there's two general, it's on a spectrum, but two general kind of paths with that. One is what I think most people probably think of, which is a psycholytic dose, which is a kind of a higher dose. A lot of people think, and rightfully so, eye shades, kind of lying down, eye shades, music, and a very internal experience. So the journey part, as the medicine comes on, most often administered by way of intramuscular or IV, or it could be lozenges or orally and in a higher dose. And so with these higher dose psychedelic doses, the journey is mostly inside. So the therapy component of that is setting that up. The set and setting, there's preparation to know what's on people's hearts and minds, what they're working with, and of course, a detailed history of their past and childhood, and also their current life and where they're looking to go. So there's that preparation. That's true for both the psychedelic dose and the psycholytic dose. I'll talk about it in a moment. And then the journey part is mostly inside. And then as the medicine wears off, there might be some conversation of and beginning integration or processing of that material. And then ideally, integration session or sessions to follow that. So non-ketamine assisted or non-ketamine sessions the next day or in the following days. So that's the psychedelic dose, of which we can talk more about. The psycholytic dose, so think lower or medium size dose. And this is what I work with a lot. So the preparation is the same, but the administration, most often oral lozenges, that again, we're aiming at an alteration. It's like kind of a therapeutic lubricant, but not full kind of blast off. So my clients remember what's arising, they're able to work with it, they have access to the cohesive narrative of their childhood, and also are able to relate to what's arising. So these psycholytic doses stay conversational, they stay relational, and much of my work is via online platforms. So clients are sitting up, they're in conversation. It might have them close their eyes and go inside and feel more space around the material that we're working with, traumatic or otherwise. And then as the medicine wears off, we also have that time and follow-up sessions, non-ketamine integration sessions.
Okay. And so we've got, just to recap,
Mm-hmm.
the psychedelic, which is not a whole lot of therapy happening during it, very deep, eye shades, all of those things, and internal experience. Psycholytic is where most of the ketamine assisted psychotherapy that we will be discussing is generally happening, where it's a lower dose and not the eye shades. You're interacting with the therapist and the patient is cognizant. It's more of an interactive than an internal.
Yeah. One distinction there, I think broadly, most people think of both as psychedelic or ketamine assisted psychotherapy, even though with a higher dose, there's that mostly internal stretch when the medicine is most active. I have found and have my clients have gotten great results by the psycholytic dose and working in that way. But I very much want to include the
Gotcha.
psychedelic doses as ketamine assisted psychotherapy.
That makes sense. And in those, it's just that more of the ketamine assisted psychotherapy is happening as they're coming out of the medicine.
The literal therapy kind of relational component, yes, but the psychotherapy part is really about the container, the preparation, yes, the holding, and there can be a very impactful hand holding, like physical hand holding, or even some communication during a psychedelic dose.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving that clarity. I have not
Mm-hmm.
gone through ketamine assisted psychotherapy training. I'm not a psychotherapist, so I always appreciate when somebody lets me in on kind of the specifics. So now we know those. So thank you for giving us the distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about what either what you think within the ketamine assisted psychotherapy um, allows for this accelerated growth, or maybe what with the IFS, which is internal family systems, promotes that? Or what do you, yeah, I guess let's start with, what do you think about that combination has been really helpful for growth in your clients?
Great. So, when preparing people to work with ketamine, and I do that within a 3-month container, there's kind of a preparation phase, working with ketamine, and then a transition phase, kind of a hero's journey. So, there's an arc. Found clients have really responded well to having a beginning, middle, and end. Not every, I would say most therapists don't work in that model, but I found a lot of utility in that. Um, the thing that really, some of the, what makes it accelerated, again, in the combination, we could have named this topic, could have been ketamine assisted IFS therapy, because I'm so steeped in it, I don't kind of know how to do without it, or I just so often bring it in. And that's in part the preparation. So we're mapping out people's system. So they're getting to know their parts along the way during the preparation. Some they might be very familiar with, they would say too familiar with, and others not so much. But what's different is their capacity. They realize their capacity to unblend a word that's used in IFS, which is basically creating a little bit of space from. So they're not identified as that inner critic, where they might be in a heightened moment. And they can be in relationship with this part of themselves. So we're learning, and they're getting practices. They're like getting reps in unblending during the preparation phase. And then we add ketamine to the mix, to the process, and ketamine in of itself can create more space between them and what the model would call protector parts. So parts that are working hard to kind of manage your day-to-day and try to keep, big overwhelming feelings or shame or terror kind of out of your conscious awareness. So these parts with ketamine, for most people, it softens these protector parts. And I want to say here kind of early on is that we definitely don't want to use any medicines to bypass these parts. There's a consequence to that. So we really get to know them and we get their permission. And in addition to their permission, the ketamine, in this case, really helps soften them so that they're more workable. We get to learn kind of their worldview, why it is they're working so hard, what their fears are. It's a really important piece. We learn what your protectors' fears are. And when they're softened, they're more likely to give up that information, if you will.
That makes a lot of sense. That's so interesting. We'd had James Fadiman on quite some time ago talking about his book, Your Symphony of Selves, and I think
Mm-hmm.
I remember after reading that book feeling like, oh, this makes so much more sense to be able to kind of parse yourself out in that way and to not have to overly identify with parts of you that I bet some of us feel like, I'm just going to go ahead and project this on everybody. I bet many of us feel like we have like an evil part to us, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
oh, a part that gets angry at times, or a part that
Mm-hmm.
isn't always the most altruistic. And then
Uh-huh.
but am I completely evil? No, there is that part that has its own, specific set of backgrounds and baggage and, trauma, for better or worse word.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have to be that person, right? We can, and I like how you're describing that we can find out what that part thinks it's doing for us.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And yeah, go ahead.
You're really hitting on a very important piece, and I think it's useful for all humans. I wish it was part of the general education. What you just described of relating and acknowledging, wow, part of me feels evil right now, or part of me like wants to do this thing that's outside of my values and the things that I care about. This model is it invokes just compassion when we're able to create a little bit of space and acknowledge these parts as aspects of ourself, not all of us. And it also points to that there's a self here. There's a one that's noticing and that's aware of, wow, this really angry part or this really shut down part. And the ability to be in relationship with that is huge. It's a game changer. Even within relationship, when I work with couples, it's a profound thing when people take on the practice of speaking for parts of themselves rather than from parts of themselves. An example of that, honey, part of me is really upset or disappointed by da 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 da, versus, honey, I'm so pissed off about this. And we might
Yeah.
even say, part of me is so pissed off about that. But the difference, it highlights to both the person speaking and the person receiving that there's an awareness of what's active in one system. Obviously, or most likely, it's playing out in their nervous system, and their tone, and their volume. But when it's voiced, that I'm aware that there's this part of me, that also lets, in this case, my wife know that, hey, I see this, I got this, and I'm going to give it voice. I'm going to speak for it rather than from it.
That's really impactful. I've never heard of it phrased that way, but I think that'll give people a lot of thoughts about how to communicate in difficult situations. So thank
Mhm.
you for that. It occurred to me while you were talking about this that obviously, if dealing with the parts is really important in growth and transformation, there has to be something with not dealing with these parts that tends to block that. So can you maybe start there? It's like what role do some of our parts tend to play in hindering our growth?
Great question. So there are potentially infinite amount of parts, and you've highlighted, or we're highlighting one here that often goes kind of unnamed, and it's a part that can shut us down or cut us off from what's true. So the very shorthand is, in childhood we all learned how to be in relationship inside of relationships where it was not equal. And it makes sense. Our parents are caregivers. They are charged with, looking after us and socializing us. And yet this is the way that we learn to be in relationship. And while we have a natural drive for authenticity, we also have a drive for connection. And that drive for connection will override our authenticity. So we will learn from our earliest environment how to be, or how we can be or cannot be. And some of those parts that arise, to your question, are, oh, that's not welcome, that's not okay, I'm going to overstress my stressed out parents if I bring that need or that concern, so I'll stuff that. So some parts take on the idea, or extreme idea is one way we talk about a burden in this model. We take on that burden that, okay, we can't express our needs, we can't express our fear or our sadness. And then along the way, that part kind of cuts us off. It kind of, literally, I'll be working with a client and we'll start to get into some of their basic universal needs that they are not in the habit of expressing or even acknowledging themselves. And they will literally, it's as if they got tranq darted. They will feel this big sleepiness come over them. They'll get really distracted. And we will, in this model, we turn right towards that. We turn towards and we talk to the sleepiness that's arising. We turn towards the part that's kind of shutting them down or that has cut them off for a long time. And in that process, we hear how old that part is, how old that part thinks you are, the client, kind of the hard work they've been doing, and their concerns about not doing that. And then one other piece is, just to speak a little bit more about the model, we will update these younger parts. So a part that says, wow, I'm not allowed to express my needs, that part almost invariably sees that adult person as like 5 or 10 years old, kind of when that was installed in a way. And then I'll have a client relate to that part of themselves as if it was a small child in the room, and kind of give them a little bit of a montage of experiences of what's happened in their life since 5 years old. Oh, well, actually went to school, did this. Some of us got medical degrees and PhDs and doing awesome work, things like that. And relationships, works, and all these different things that have unfolded. And it's, in a sense, kind of an updating process that happens. So these younger parts begin to realize, not just cognitively, but they start to feel, wow, this person is leading now. And I don't have to do this job that I've been doing for so long.
Oh, very interesting. And so is it that when that part stops having to do all that work, that maybe the energy that it was taking from the person to do all that work can be redirected towards other areas of growth?
So glad you said that. Energy, that it literally, and I know this in my own process of having worked with an IFS therapist for some time, it frees up energy. I'm talking about having more space for focus, more clarity. It takes energy to carry burdens around. I mean, simply, if you were carrying around, 50, 100-pound weights in each arm, you might get used to it over time. But when we're able to set these down, and that actually is very often the experience of the concierge ketamine IFS ketamine-assisted IFS programs, people feel that, wow, I've just set this down. I've heard directly from clients, wow, this is what I'm like without the anxiety. This is what my body feels like, not in overwhelm or in fight mode. So it's in setting this down, it absolutely frees up energy. And back to the model, it might sound a little woo-woo, but I'm telling you, I've been doing this for over 10 years and I've my own process with it too. We can ask these parts, what would they rather do than when they realize they don't have to do that job anymore. So imagine you've been you're a part and you've been doing this job for 30, 40 years. And then not because you were told, but because you come to the real felt sense understanding, oh shit, I don't have to do that anymore. There is a awake, present, conscious, loving person here who's wanting to and is able and capable of leading and guiding my life. I don't have to do that job anymore. What is it that I want to do? And the range is exciting and it's very varied, but oftentimes it's like, I want to do more creative work. I want to put this energy into my relationships, or I want, it goes on and on. But we can actually ask those parts or ask your whole system, what do you want to do with this freed up energy?
Because I was going to ask, what kinds of growth have you seen in your clients? And I'm guessing, or maybe you could tell me, is that what comes from that answer? Or is it just, had they come to you for a specific type of growth? Or is that, once you've done the parts work, where that growth occurs is a result?
Great. So a couple ways to talk about this, and I'll give some examples. But generally, this work is as much of a training for people to get to know themselves. So we work with kind of the biggest pieces, the things that have been holding them down or blocking them in some way, blocking their full expression. And after that, they're now trained to work with any number of parts. It's almost like triage. We work with kind of the biggest, most immediate emergent pieces, and then along the way they're getting a training. Oh, I can turn towards, which obviously is big in the psychedelic space and something that these medicines offer, or at least the best kind of care around it is supporting us to turn towards what's here versus avoiding it. So clients will learn how to work with themselves, with their own system along the way. I've worked with a wide range of people. Some examples, a woman in her 30s, and she was involved with a horrific accident in which somebody died. And she had tried multiple forms of therapy, but she was unable to talk about the events without a lot of panic. And she was having panic attacks somewhat regularly, but the most regular trigger for that was any conversation about that accident. And her nervous system, or in the model, some protective parts would not let her go near that. Her nervous system wouldn't settle enough. So she was referred to me. We started working. We started to map out her system. We built relationships with these protector parts. We literally, sincerely got to honoring these parts of her that were working fucking nonstop in order to protect her. And then when we brought ketamine in, it helped create even more space. It eased her nervous system and created a little bit more space so that we could deepen and essentially deepen the relationship with these protector parts, and updating them along the way that they don't have to do this job. That in this case, this client, this woman, is actually safe enough. And that conversation unfolded where she got her life back. And then I can see her in my mind's eye right now. What started with kind of that accident, we really went into the fear, anger, and she was not accustomed to expressing anger, but she was able to access that. And then the grief, not only for the horrific accident, but underneath that from multiple reasons from childhood of having grief that needed her attention. And that ketamine-assisted space, particularly with IFS, really provided for that. One other kind of similar situation, a veteran, late 40s, he first was into couples therapy. His wife lassoed him into couples therapy because there was a lot of interruption and there was conflict in the relationship. And he was not able to stay in the room after a certain point because things kept pointing back to something within him that was limiting. And while it often pointed to some of his experience in the military, there was just this kind of progressive shutting down, which would result in like a burst of anger. He literally left the therapy room. So I was told. He was referred to me, this guy, very stoic. And as we got to know his protectors, many of them were like soldiers themselves. They were very militant, hardline, yes, no, very kind of extreme in their way of what was possible and allowed along the way. So we did an extended preparation, worked together for a couple months to really establish a relationship with these parts, these protector parts. And then when we added ketamine, there was the extra space, the extra support for him to know these protectors even on a deeper level, or just increased the relationship with these protector parts. And then here again, what I'm noticing is a pattern both in my private practice and what I saw as part, my good fortune to be a part of the MDMA for PTSD study, is that it often starts with an acute or a seemingly single incident trauma and cause PTSD, that underneath that we get to address, and with the support of these psychedelic medicines, we're able to address the childhood trauma underneath. And that is where this went. And to report, actually got a note just last week about the space that this person is in now with their marriage. I'm smiling. It's a very good situation that he was able to not only, and that's an example also of where we did this heavy lifting together in this space, but after those months of working together, he's now able, he's in conversation. He talks to his wife. He tells his wife about the different parts and what's active for him. And she's adopted the language. And so that's turned into a very beautiful situation.
Oh, I love to hear it. Thank you for those reports from your clients. I think it always really brings it home when people can maybe identify with, that does sound like something I've gone through. I could see where that could be, akin to maybe a situation I'm feeling. I was wondering if you could maybe, and to go a step further in helping listeners perhaps identify, is there any kind of general categories of growth that you could maybe name that people might be having, without even maybe realizing it consciously, that people may be looking for, like areas where people may be looking for growth in?
Sure. One litmus test, if you will, around that is the question. A question that comes up in session is, tell me about where you don't love yourself, or what about yourself is unlovable. And that often highlights kind of a trailhead of that which needs our attention, because, I've got some decades in this life. And I think one of the things that I wish I could have told my earlier, younger self is to really focus on these areas where if there's a part of myself that I can't love or care for or deeply respect, then that really needs my attention, because I don't know what the fuck else we're supposed to do here on this planet than know our experience, accept, grow. We have this capacity and this drive to grow. So with that, and to borrow from the model, the IFS model again. So there, I mentioned protector parts. And what these protector parts are doing is they're protecting against exiles from coming to the surface. Exiles are also parts that carry burdens, important to say parts, we never want to get rid of them. One, because it doesn't work, and then two, because it's counterintuitive. You can't push against something that's job is to protect. And very important, the parts themselves are not bad, including, just to go to kind of the most extreme example, a suicidal part. When I was early as a clinician, or even in training, it was like, wow, I do not want to work with suicidal clients. That has completely shifted. Whereas this model, and I'm talking without psychedelics, is really helpful to help facilitate a conversation with a person who's in front of you and their suicidal part, the part of them that holds this like idea that we have to get out of here at all costs, no takebacks. And invariably, as we get into that part gives up the information or shares. It's like something good. It wants relief. It wants this person to have it, not suffer so much. So that, using that extreme example, that even the most, seemingly scary parts, as we get to know them, we can learn from them. So back to, we work with protectors. We literally ask protectors to step out of the way. The protector's job is to not let exiles. This is a term that for another part that's holding a very extreme burden. And to your question of what are things to put on people's radar, these exiles are often kind of a core constellation of things of like, in some way, I'm not okay. I'm not lovable. I'm not good enough. I'm not safe. Something like this, which is, for those of you that haven't been or not a therapist or haven't been to therapy, it is the most common response for a child to essentially make it about themselves, a challenging situation or challenges that come up in childhood, a child to make it about themselves. Well, maybe there's an alcoholic parent and they're really inconsistent, or someone in the family is really scary, or something's happening and you see it, but no one's talking about it and it's really scary or uncomfortable. We can take that on as something must not be okay about me. It's not a egoic thing. It's a limitation of only being in the world for a couple of years and not really, and again, in this kind of power over dynamic with the people around us. So all that to say, exiles tend to take on an extreme belief that would be shame, terror, unlovability. And in getting to know, squaring up to, kind of asking questions about, oh, do I, actually in this work, we don't have to ask questions about it. Most roads lead there. And it's important, just to reiterate, it's vital to work with the protectors. So people that haven't taken IFS training like level 1 and they read a lot about it, which please do, learn all about it, watch a lot of, get whatever training we can. But the big difference is being really clear in needing to work with protectors, not just jumping to exiles. Oh, let's dive right in. Oh, that's your most wounded part as a child. Let's go right into that and let's like work that out and ask, what it needs and update it. It just, the system is incredible in its design. And what Dick Schwartz and many others have learned over 4 decades is that we work with it in a way that's really honoring and respectful, such as working with the protectors, and they will eventually step back so that we can work with these exiles, which are the parts that carry the most extreme burdens.
Wow, thank you for sharing all that. I'm sure you have gotten a lot of people, especially when you got into the this is where the shame,
Mm.
et cetera, lives. I think a lot of people that, I mean, there are two parts I think that, just even if I'm putting myself in the role of a listener,
Mm.
as I am listening to you talk right now, they
Mm-hmm.
hit me. One which was, what part of you do you feel is unlovable? Like, if anybody here does not have an answer to that, I mean,
Right.
who doesn't, right? Like that, we all have some part of ourselves that where, we maybe wish wasn't there, or we wish was a little
Hmm.
different, and then also to name things like shame or guilt or grief or whatever those, parts that may be holding us back, that we would very often rather not address. And like you said, we're not trying to skip those parts, because that's never the point of growth does not occur when you skip those, but when you bypass those. So I love that you brought up that that's, very important in this work. I wanted to kind of close out this conversation by asking more about how you think ketamine is particularly helpful. You, like you said, you did IFS work prior to using ketamine.
Hmm.
Can you talk about maybe a little bit in like the difference that you see with clients in ketamine, and also maybe a little bit about what you think that is? Is it, we know ketamine can lead to like some neuroplasticity, but is that immediate? Is that longer term?
Hmm.
And you worked in the MDMA trials,
Hmm.
and the MDMA, that MDMA can basically take the fear center, the amygdala,
Hmm.
offline. But what is kind of if is there like a ketamine equivalent? Because you said it softens up those protectors a little bit. So I know
Hmm.
I just asked you like 24 and a half
Got
questions in one, but
it.
whatever answer series you want to give for that.
Got it. I love it. So why ketamine, or what ketamine does to help facilitate this accelerated growth? And by growth, we could have subbed out, self-love, deep respect and care, and authenticity. So what ketamine does is a couple things. One, it creates, the most simple way I say it is, it creates a little bit more space. What do I mean by that? I mean, we're not, as the medicine comes on, the way we know and experience our body begins to shift a little bit. Again, this is on a spectrum of low, medium, or larger dose. And then we start, and yet consciousness or awareness stays online. So this thing that vast majority of our species never thinks to create a separation from, I am my body, we're like, okay, that's funky. And yet there's this space and kind of this neutralness to the awareness that we can bring to that. So with that, um, that is creates a working space. So therapeutically, or as a therapist, I'm looking to help create the environment externally, a trusting therapeutic alliance, psychoeducation, but also important, the holding a vision that they know, or the person I'm working with, they have what they need inside of them. In the same way, you've heard the story, we're cut, our body knows how to heal, our psyches do, our systems do. So I'm holding that space and that vision for there, and I'm actually quite confident that that's possible. And I hold that and I let them know repeatedly. That's the external environment. The internal environment in which ketamine, amid other medicines, can help support is for many, a novel experience. And when we're struck with a novel experience, the part of us that kind of knows how things go and has things figured out, it has to figure something else out. And most often, that is an expansion of what we used to know. So, these medicines, whether they create a full novel experience, just the alteration can help us relate to and notice different parts. For some of my clients, it turns up the volume of their parts, whereas they, in preparation, might have them go inside. Can you connect with that part? Answer is often yes, though when we bring ketamine on board, that can be highlighted or accentuated, that the communication can become even stronger and clearer. And I know with, ketamine is what's legal now. I've good fortune to work with MDMA. There's so many other medicines that are going to support this, our healing by way of kind of the core of this model, externalizing so that different parts or aspects of ourselves, so that we can know the one who's knowing, the one that can embrace all these parts and live a meaningful, creative life.
Very nice. And I'm assuming that when they, whatever kind of let's say, changes or realizations or whatever's moved during your session,
Mhm.
I'm guessing that the neuroplasticity aspects of the ketamine perhaps helps those form some new neural pathways to support that.
Absolutely. I mean, I say that with both confidence that they're having that experience, but also I am loud about expressing that. So, meaning, okay, so we just had this assisted journey. You went on this experience. We're now the next day in the integration. And I really highlight for the next several days, your brain has been juiced up a bit. It's not with serotonin, necessarily dopamine, but rather glutamate. So this is really affiliated with learning. So how you talk to yourself is really important. And it's different when you read that in a book. Oh, I should talk to myself, in a better way, or I should be open. But rather, when you're given this 1 week window and have recently had a reference point, say, so the ketamine during a ketamine session, it's like, wow, I do deserve a lot of love, or like, wow, these parts have been working so hard. So you have that reference point fresh in your mind. So that next week, how often, as part of integration, which is, in part where the magic happens. I say the magic happens all the way, all the way through. But where the magic happens is this commitment to noticing what's arising and trying something new. Oh, there's that part that says you're a piece of shit. What would it be like to greet that, to say it out loud, to literally put your hands together and bow to it and say, I know you're trying to protect me. And then take 3 breaths, connect with something that you really want for yourself, a vision of your future self that will be on the shoulders of all this challenging work you're doing now. So,
Thank you for that. I think it's a
mhm.
beautiful way to wrap up this episode. However, I still would love you to tell everybody where they can find more about your work and the work you're doing with the Treat Initiative.
Sure thing. So, thanks for mentioning Treat. So you can find out about me, apracticeoffreedom.com, or Dr. Nick Brüss, Bruss, on Instagram. The Treat Initiative, which I am stoked about, briefly is a citizen-driven initiative. So essentially, a number of states have this capacity written in their constitution, where essentially, if the citizens aren't getting what they want and need, there's a way written in that they can go around the politicians and lobbyists, and that's called a citizen-driven ballot. So we're looking to gain 1 million signatures here in California. And what that's going to do is put this ballot measure on the 2024 November election ballot. And what we're presenting, or what's on offer, and which I'm feeling very excited about, essentially, it would create a funding agency to fund mental health, specifically the psychedelic-assisted work towards mental health. So uh, here's a big number: $5 billion. It will create a funding agency that will bring $5 billion over the next 10 years into this space, where TREAT itself is an acronym for treatment, research, education, access, and therapies. So research will be a very important part. And Marie, as you know, research done well anywhere impacts the world right away. So while in a way this is focused in California, it will have huge ripples throughout the world. It will also be a blueprint for other states and other countries to do something similar. Really invest in this space. Research for the unpatentable psychedelics, and then also education. As you know, there was recently a decrim bill that was vetoed here in California. And that seems inevitable, just a matter of time, right? Though what's not inevitable is having funding for public education, harm reduction around that, in addition to more training for therapists, and then also creating avenues for access for all Californians and a blueprint for other states and countries to make psychedelic assisted therapies possible. And so with that to end is like treatcalifornia.org. If you're in California, we'd love your signature. The thing is, it has to be a wet signature. It's not a digital thing. So you can find a place to put your signature. You can inform and tell other people about it. You can donate. You can donate from anywhere in the world, actually, only in the United States. You can donate in the United States to make this happen, get on the ballot, and have, I sincerely think it will be the biggest thing in psychedelics since 1970, since they were locked up, because it's going to provide $500 million a year for the next 10 years in funding for the research that we need.
Amazing. So that was treatcalifornia.org to find a place to go sign.
Yes.
Okay. Incredible. Thank you for the work you're doing with Treat. Thank you so much for explaining, IFS is not an easy thing to explain. So thank you for bringing that to us and giving us a thorough explanation of what it is and how impactful it can be for your clients. I'm not going to lie. I've been like, where do I find one of these IFS people? I'm just really, you've opened my eyes to some very interesting concepts, and I'm really looking forward to learning more. Like I said, it's no coincidence that two people this week wanted this exact episode that you have come forth unknowingly to provide. So yay. Thank you so much, Nick, for being on today and sharing with us.
Lynn-Marie, thank you. Thanks for everything you do. It's a lot. Thanks.
Oh, I appreciate it. All right. For everybody else out there, until next time. Thanks so much for listening to the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a rating or review, as it helps others find the show. And if you'd like to learn more, you can find the show notes at plantmedicine.org/podcast, and there's information for clinicians at psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. Our incredible music was by the one and only Porangi. We'll see you next time.